It began on a cloudless June morning at the Beaumont Hotel, one of London's most discreet and exclusive establishments, tucked just off Grosvenor Square. The sort of place where titled aristocrats mingled with industrial tycoons, and where wealth was measured not in diamonds wore, but in the hush with which staff handled secrets. At precisely 9:17 a.m., an ear-splitting scream shattered the hush. The source was room 405, where Lady Wilhelmina d'Harcourt, widow of Lord Edgar d'Harcourt, had been residing for the past month. Within seconds, the floor's corridor filled with concerned whispers and hasty footfalls. The maid who had entered the room, a young woman named Elsie Chapman, stood trembling in the hallway, her hands stained crimson and her voice reduced to frantic sobs. Inside, Lady d'Harcourt's body lay slumped over her breakfast tray. A letter opener, ornate and brass-handled, protruded from her throat. Blood had seeped into the lace collar of her pale blue dressing gown. Her tea remained untouched. The croissant was half-eaten. Detective Inspector Charles Bream of Scotland Yard arrived within the hour. d'Harcourt's suite had been sealed off, the corridor cleared of guests, and the staff confined to a private parlor for questioning. Bream was a competent man, seasoned and skeptical. He surveyed the room with a frown, murmuring observations to the sergeant at his elbow. Jewelry untouched, no signs of forced entry. Door locked from the inside but unbolted. No signs of struggle. And this, he pointed to a half-written note on the bedside table, her fountain pen still uncapped. She was writing something. Could be a clue. It wasn't a long note. Only a few words had been scrawled. Tell Julian that... The sentence stopped mid-thought. No further trace of the intended message could be found. By noon, news of the murder had reached the drawing rooms of Mayfair and the gentlemen's clubs of Pall Mall. Lady d'Harcourt's death was more than a mere scandal. It was a social earthquake. She had been a prominent figure in London society, known for her wealth, her charity work, and her sharp tongue. But those who knew her well whispered other things, that she had many enemies, and perhaps even more secrets. Among the first to hear the news was Hercule Poirot. He had been lunching alone at Café Monaco, trimming the edges of his sandwich with surgical precision, when his old acquaintance, Chief Inspector Japp, slid into the seat opposite him with the urgency of someone who had just lost a bet and a good night's sleep. Beaumont Hotel, Japp said. Murder, high society. You'd enjoy it. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Mon ami, it is rarely that murder aligns so perfectly with dessert. Who is the unfortunate soul? Lady Wilhelmina d'Harcourt, throat slit with a letter opener. Poirot raised a brow. Such violence for a lady of elegance. Was she alone? In the room, yes. But her breakfast was brought up just minutes before. Maid found her when she returned to tidy. Poirot leaned forward. Then either the killer is someone trusted enough to enter freely, or someone clever enough to avoid detection. Either way, it is not an impulsive crime. May I see the scene? Japp sighed, already knowing there was no point in resisting. You may as well. Bream's in charge, but I'll smooth it over. Don't spook him too much. An hour later, Poirot stood at the threshold of room 405. He examined every detail as though he were observing a still life painting. Nothing escaped his gaze, not the speck of jam on the saucer, nor the smudge on the mirrored wardrobe. She was interrupted, Poirot murmured. The pen uncapped, the ink not yet dry. She was about to write something critical, perhaps something she had been hesitating to say, and then he motioned toward the corpse, interrupted fatally. He turned to Bream. The staff, monsieur. How many had access? Only a few. Maid, room service attendant, and a valet who came up to fetch laundry. All accounted for. Of course, Poirot said lightly. And the guests? Bream hesitated. 3 individuals of note on this floor. Lord Julian d'Harcourt, her stepson, Lady Serena Lee, her longtime friend, and Dr. Clarence Venn, her physician. All reportedly had good relations with her. Poirot's mustache twitched. Good relations, oui. But sometimes, monsieur, the blade comes not from hate, but from love, or money, or fear. Later that evening, Poirot took tea in the Beaumont's lounge, watching the comings and goings with narrowed eyes. It was there that he observed the first contradiction. Lord Julian d'Harcourt, dashing and sun-kissed from his recent return from Tangier, wore a look of appropriately restrained grief. But when Lady Serena arrived in a flurry of silk and whispered condolences, Julian's composure faltered for just a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing between them. Poirot noticed the clenched jaw, the stiff nod, the way Julian's hand never quite touched hers in return. He turned to Jap. "Mon ami, I believe this crime is like the English garden, charming above the soil and full of tangled roots beneath." As night fell over London, the Beaumont Hotel remained under quiet lockdown. No one had been arrested. No motive had been confirmed, but Poirot, in his methodical way, had already begun to pull at the threads. And though the killer may have thought they were safe, hiding in plain sight among friends, lovers, and old secrets, Monsieur Poirot was already watching. The following morning, the lounge of the Beaumont was unusually subdued. The piano, normally manned at breakfast by a white-gloved musician playing unobtrusive Strauss, stood untouched. Conversations were hushed, eyes wary. The grand chandelier overhead sparkled with its usual brilliance, but beneath it, shadows had grown in every corner of the room. Hercule Poirot took his usual seat, not at the center, but at an angle that afforded him a clear view of all entrances. He was not one to waste observation, and the people he meant to observe were beginning to trickle in. Inspector Bream, with whom Poirot had now struck an unspoken truce, allowed the gathering of all relevant parties in one of the smaller drawing rooms on the second floor, a tasteful space with heavy curtains and thick carpets, ensuring both privacy and the psychological pressure Poirot intended to apply. One by one, they entered and took their seats beneath the distant watch of Poirot's grey-green eyes. Lord Julian d'Harcourt arrived first. At 34, he was every inch the image of aristocratic poise. Immaculately tailored, impossibly well-groomed, and yet oddly pallid beneath the tan. He offered the air of polite mourning, but Poirot noticed the stiffness in his walk, the restless twitch of his fingers. Julian had been in Tangier until 3 days ago, returning abruptly at Lady d'Harcourt's invitation. The coincidence was worth noting. Next came Lady Serena Lee, a woman whose reputation had preceded her even before Poirot made inquiries. In her 50s, tall, raven-haired, and composed with the precision of one who had spent decades in the spotlight of society columns, she gave off an aura of dignity tinged with something harder to define. She wore a simple black dress and a string of pearls, but Poirot's attention went to the gloves she did not remove and the faint trace of scent that lingered behind her. Not floral. Something darker, something bitter. Then entered Dr. Clarence Venn, the late Lady d'Harcourt's personal physician, 60-ish, with a distinguished bearing, a silver beard trimmed to academic perfection, and the air of a man who had seen too much and spoken of too little. He bowed slightly to Poirot, then moved to the far side of the room, where he stood instead of sitting. Venn had reportedly been close to Lady d'Harcourt, not socially, but within that particular intimacy, that long-term illness sometimes bred between patient and doctor. Miss Elspeth Elsie Chapman, the young maid who discovered the body, sat nearest the door. Her cheeks still bore the remnants of yesterday's tears. She was perhaps 20, perhaps less, and spoke little unless spoken to. Poirot glanced at her more than once, not for what she might reveal directly, but for how others reacted to her presence. Every so often, Julian d'Harcourt cast her a glance not of suspicion, but of distaste, as though proximity to the lower class was somehow offensive, even in tragedy. 2 others were present, Mr. Harold St. John, the hotel's manager, had been added to the gathering at Poirot's insistence. A tall, angular man with a face like pressed linen, St. John had overseen the hotel's operations for 15 years and seemed more perturbed by the disruption to his establishment's reputation than by the murder itself. And finally, Madame Celestine, the hotel's concierge, who had been with Lady d'Harcourt daily during her stay. She was French, middle-aged, and full of that meticulous discretion which made her more dangerous than the police if one had something to hide. Poirot did not open with questions. Instead, he stood by the fireplace, hands gently steepled, and allowed silence to fill the room. It worked as he intended. "Is this really necessary?" Julian asked at last, breaking the tension. "We've all said our piece to the police." "Ah, but moi, I'm not the police," Poirot replied pleasantly. "I prefer to listen, not merely to facts, but to truths. And the truth, mes amis, does not always come in uniform." Dr. Venn cleared his throat. "With respect, Monsieur Poirot, I don't see how delaying the investigation with further drawing-room theater assists anyone." Poirot smiled thinly. "I do not delay, Doctor. I arrange. In the same way a surgeon might pause before the incision, not to hesitate, but to strike precisely." He turned to Julian. "Tell me, my lord, you returned to London 3 days ago. Why?" "My stepmother asked me to," Julian said. "She wrote, said she wanted to settle some matters concerning the estate. I assumed it was about the will." Poirot nodded. "Naturally. You are the principal heir, yes?" Julian's jaw tightened. "I was under that impression. I haven't seen the new will, if there is one." Lady Serena shifted. Poirot caught the motion. "You knew about this meeting, Lady Serena?" "She mentioned it to me, yes," Serena replied coolly. "But only vaguely. Wilhelmina liked to hold her cards close." "Ah, but someone always sees the hand before it is played," Poirot said softly. He turned next to Madame Celestine. "You attended Lady d'Harcourt frequently?" "Oui, monsieur. Each morning. We arranged her engagements, correspondence, personal errands." "Did she seem distressed recently?" Celestine hesitated. "No, but there was une tension. She did not sleep well. She was distracted." Poirot inclined his head. "Did she receive visitors?" "Only Dr. Venn and Lady Serena. Not Lord Julian. She preferred correspondence. I delivered 2 letters from her to him in Tangier, one 3 weeks ago, the other 4 days before her death." Poirot's brow lifted. "And the contents of these letters?" "I never read them," Celestine replied. But the second was shorter, thinner, perhaps only a few lines. Poirot turned to Julian. "Did you receive it?" Julian's gaze flicked sideways. "No. The last I heard from her was the first letter. I arrived without further word." A pause. Poirot said nothing, but the silence returned, now heavy with implication. Elsie, the maid, raised her voice timidly. I saw Milord that morning." All heads turned. Julian straightened. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything, sir," she stammered. "Only, I saw you leaving the service staircase a little after 8. I thought you'd come down from the roof." Poirot pounced gently. "Ah, interesting. The main elevator was not functioning." "No, sir, not that morning, but Lady d'Harcourt never liked visitors before 9. Julian's tone turned sharp. "I stepped out for air. I didn't go near her suite." Poirot simply nodded and made a note in his pocketbook. Then, to no one in particular, he said, "There are secrets in this room, mes amis. I feel them like a draft under the door. One of you has worn a mask for too long, but masks slip." He bowed, concluding the meeting for the day. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered behind. Japp approached from the doorway. "Well?" he asked. "Anyone jump out at you?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. No one jumps, mon ami, but someone hesitates, and in hesitation, there is truth. He walked to the window, gazing down at the garden below. We have a murderer who has hidden not with shadows, but with manners, with silence, with decorum. He turned back to Jap with a small smile. Now, I shall begin to pull the threads. The day after the drawing room assembly, Hercule Poirot requested a private meeting with Inspector Bream, who begrudgingly agreed, though with a faint scowl that betrayed his unease at handing over even the illusion of control. Bream was not a fool, but Poirot's calm authority, born not of rank but of relentless precision, left most senior officers feeling somewhat reduced. In the inspector's office, tucked temporarily into a corner suite of the Beaumont Hotel, Poirot leaned against the desk while Bream flipped through a stack of typed witness summaries. "I don't like having a parade of aristocrats wasting my time," Bream muttered. "They lie in finer sentences, but lie all the same." Poirot smiled. "Then you will be most gratified, monsieur, to let me focus on something other than their sentences. I wish to begin with the room itself." He was referring to Lady Darcourt's suite. Room 405 had been sealed, examined, photographed, and cordoned off. Yet Poirot had not conducted a full review. He requested it now, privately, without interruptions or the presence of staff. Bream agreed, so long as a constable stood outside to maintain chain of access. Inside the room, Poirot moved with deliberate slowness. He did not speak. He did not touch. He only observed. Lady Darcourt's corpse had already been removed, but the outline remained in Poirot's mind. The breakfast tray, now refrigerated as evidence, had left an impression on the tablecloth. A perfect rectangle, marred by a single circle of spilled tea. The porcelain cup had fallen, but not shattered. Poirot bent to examine the area near the hearth. No signs of a struggle. No dislodged furniture. No open window. Then the desk. The note, "Tell Julian that," remained untouched in its glass evidence sleeve. Poirot stared at it a long while. He whispered the sentence under his breath several times, then moved to the dressing table. Cosmetics, arranged with mechanical precision, perfume bottle uncapped. A single earring, emerald oval cut, lay on a velvet tray, its pair missing. He turned to the mirrored wardrobe. One corner of the mirror bore a smudge, not a fingerprint, too broad. A palm, perhaps. Poirot made no remark, but narrowed his eyes at the carpet immediately in front of the wardrobe. A faint indentation, two narrow parallel lines, barely visible unless one knew what to seek. He crouched, slowly given his age, and peered beneath the bed. Dust, a heel mark, and something glinting at the far edge. A tiny brass screw, fresh and clean. He retrieved it delicately using his silk handkerchief and examined it. Not from a piece of furniture. Not from the door hinges. Too small, possibly from a compact item. A locket? A pen? He did not pocket it. Instead, he replaced it where it had fallen. Clues, Poirot often said, are like birds. They fly away when disturbed. Next, he moved to the side table. The drawer had been opened and catalogued already, but he re-examined its contents. Inside, a novel, The Moon and Sixpence, 2 receipts from Cartier, a typed note from Dr. Venn with recent prescription instructions, and, tucked beneath a linen cloth, a hotel envelope addressed in looping script. Serena. He did not open the envelope. He observed the slight curve in the flap. It had been resealed, expertly, but not originally. Poirot set it down with care, leaving it undisturbed. Then, the wardrobe itself. He opened the mirrored door and reviewed the contents. Gowns, jackets, handbags. Shoes, arranged in a near-perfect line, except for one pair of flats slightly misaligned. He removed one and inspected the sole. Clean. The other, a single dark stain along the edge of the arch. He straightened, his expression thoughtful, and looked once more at the mirror. A hairline crack ran from the corner. Subtle, old, but it had begun to widen. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and murmured, "La pièce est muette." May the silence, it speaks. He returned to Bream's office and requested a copy of the building's floor plans. Specifically, the service passages, dumbwaiters, and access stairwells. Bream raised an eyebrow but complied. "Planning to crawl through the walls?" he asked dryly. Poirot shook his head. "I only wished to know what the murderer knew, because whoever killed Lady d'Harcourt had access not just to her suite, but to her habits." Bream leaned back. "You still think it was someone close?" Poirot turned to him. "Let me pose a question. What kind of person brings a letter opener to a breakfast visit? What kind of person uses no gloves but leaves no fingerprints? What kind of person allows the victim to begin writing a note, but acts before it is finished?" Bream didn't answer. Poirot tapped the desk softly. "One who is welcome, one who is trusted, one who knows precisely how long she takes to butter her croissant." Poirot requested the list of all deliveries made to room 405 in the past 48 hours. Only two stood out. One, a breakfast tray delivered at 8:03 a.m. Two, a package brought up at 7:46 a.m., signed for by the maid, and said to contain correspondence and a magazine. Poirot asked to see the package, which had been placed in evidence. When it arrived, he inspected the wrapping carefully. The sender was a publishing house, but Poirot noted the address had been typed on an old typewriter, not the usual pre-printed labels used for regular subscribers. Inside, a political magazine, a handwritten note of encouragement, and an unsigned card with the words, "For your eyes only." Poirot said nothing, but his eyes sharpened. He asked to speak with Elsie Chapman again. The girl arrived 20 minutes later, nervously wiping her hands on her apron. Poirot greeted her kindly, seated her, and began gently. "Mademoiselle, tell me again, when did you last see Lady d'Harcourt alive?" "A little after 8, she said. "I brought the tray in. She said I could leave it near the bed. She was writing a letter, seemed distracted. I didn't stay long." "Did she speak?" "She said thank you, that's all." Poirot nodded. "And when did you find her?" 20 minutes later. I'd gone to the laundry room and came back up to collect her tray. I knocked, then let myself in. She was already gone." Poirot tilted his head. "You did not hear anything strange in the corridor? Footsteps? Voices?" Elsie hesitated. I thought I heard a click, like a door closing softly, but not from her room, maybe from the end of the hall." Poirot thanked her, then remained seated for a while after she left, silent in thought. He knew now the rhythm of the crime. A murder executed within minutes of the maid's departure. The killer must have waited for privacy and known the window was small. Back in his own suite, Poirot finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. He reviewed what he knew. The killer had not broken in. The killer had known her schedule. The killer had known precisely when to act, too precise for guesswork. The killer had approached calmly enough that Lady d'Harcourt had not screamed. The killer had interrupted a letter but had not taken it, suggesting panic or oversight. And the killer had possibly taken something else, perhaps the missing earring or the resealed letter to Serena. Poirot walked to his window and looked out at the London skyline, indifferent to its beauty. He thought instead of a phrase he had once heard from a villain who underestimated him. The perfect murder is not the one no one solved. It's the one no one notices. But this one had been noticed, and Poirot was watching. Poirot began the next phase of his investigation not with the scene of the crime, nor with physical evidence, but with people. He had long believed that truth lived in contradiction, and contradiction lived in people. Objects merely confirmed what the heart already knew. That morning, in a private lounge repurposed for his use, Poirot summoned each person connected to Lady d'Harcourt, alone, without legal formality, yet with an air that made the process feel more judgment than inquiry. First came Lord Julian d'Harcourt. He entered with confidence, as if to remind the room of his social place within it. Poirot gestured to a chair, offered tea, and then folded his hands. "You were close with your stepmother." Julian's expression tightened, polite but firm. "We were respectful. She married my father late in life. I was already living abroad by then. She invited you back recently. Why now?" "She wanted to change the will. She said she felt the current arrangement was outdated. I didn't expect anything to change. We weren't close, but she was family." "You did not see her that morning?" "No, I went for a walk. I wasn't expected until lunch." Poirot gave a soft nod. "Forgive me, my lord, but you were observed on the service staircase just after 8. Julian's smile stiffened. "I said I went for air. The main elevator was out of order. I walked to the roof." "Did anyone see you there?" "No. And I assume I don't need an alibi for a stroll." Poirot raised one brow. "Only if it intersects with murder. Tell me, did your stepmother ever speak of fears? Concerns?" "She was always suspicious of people. Everyone was after her money, or so she thought." Poirot made a quiet note. "Including you?" Julian's eyes met his directly. "I didn't need her money. I still don't." When Julian left, Poirot paused for several minutes before calling in Lady Serena Lee. She entered with a composed grace, her back perfectly straight, her voice as smooth as marble. "You and Lady d'Harcourt were old friends." "More than friends," Serena said. "We were companions, since childhood. She trusted very few people, her husbands least of all. She confided in you. Until recently. She had grown paranoid in the last year, always locking drawers, scribbling things down. She started carrying that silly letter opener in her dressing gown pocket, as if she were preparing for attack." Poirot tilted his head. "Did you receive any letters from her in the last week?" "No, not in years." Poirot's brow creased. "But a sealed envelope was found addressed to you in her drawer. Had you quarreled?" Serena's poise faltered, but only slightly. She had been unpredictable lately. Perhaps she meant to write and changed her mind. "Would you like to see the envelope?" Serena hesitated, then shook her head. "No. If she didn't send it, she didn't want me to read it, and she was a woman of intention." Poirot allowed her to leave, then called in Dr. Clarence Venn. The physician took his seat with the calm detachment of a man used to delivering bad news. "You were Lady d'Harcourt's doctor for 5 years." 8, Venn corrected. Since her second stroke, she had recovered well, though lately she reported dizzy spells. Had she grown fearful or paranoid? She had always been anxious, increasingly so, yes, but her concerns were not delusions. She believed someone close to her was deceiving her. I encouraged her to rest. She rarely listened. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did you see her the morning of her death?" "No. My last visit was 3 days earlier." "Yet you left a note for her with updated prescriptions." Venn's eyes narrowed. "Yes. She requested dosage changes. I sent the note via the concierge." Poirot glanced toward the window. "You knew her habits well?" "I knew she always had tea with breakfast. I knew she read the Times before any other paper. I knew she never wore green after 5. Yes, I knew her well." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Did you love her?" The question landed heavily. Venn's pause was long, but not uncertain. "I respected her, which is not what I asked." The doctor stood abruptly. "I will not dignify gossip." Poirot did not stop him as he left. Instead, he requested Madame Celestine next. She entered with her usual crispness, her uniform immaculate, her hair in a perfect chignon. "Madame, you handled Lady d'Harcourt's daily correspondence?" "Oui, Monsieur Poirot. All incoming and outgoing mail. She had no secretary. Did you handle a letter addressed to Lord Julian 4 days ago? I did. It was short. Very short. I posted it myself. And did she receive any unusual deliveries? She received a parcel the morning she died. It was brought up by a bellboy. I signed for it as usual. Did you see her open it? No, but I placed it on her side table. Poirot made a note. You know who sent it? No name was given, but the return label was from a publisher. Poirot tapped his pen thoughtfully. Celestine continued, that morning she seemed different. Calm, not frightened, as if something had been resolved. Poirot said, Merci, madame, and she left with a slight nod. Finally, Poirot requested Elsie Chapman once more. This time she entered less timidly, her hands clasped. Miss Chapman, may I ask, when you entered the room that morning, did you touch anything other than the tray? No, sir. I left it on the table. She told me too. I didn't go further in. Did you notice anything strange in the room? She was writing. That stood out. She usually read the paper. Was she smiling, angry? Elsie shook her head. She looked focused, like she was getting something off her chest. Poirot paused. Do you know what time the bellboy brought the parcel? I think just before I went in. He was coming down the hall when I was going up. Did you speak to him? No, just past him. Poirot leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together. When she left, he did not summon another. He sat in silence, reviewing the interviews. Each person had provided information. Some offered facts, others offered masks. But already Poirot could see the cracks in the masks, the places where truth threatened to show itself. He reviewed what he had learned. Julian had returned earlier than expected, had no clear alibi, and had been caught using a discreet exit. Serena was hiding something, perhaps the contents of the unopened envelope. Venn bristled at the idea of emotional involvement, but had shown signs of personal entanglement. Celestine had handled a package whose origin was more suspicious than it first appeared. And Elsie had passed the bellboy at a crucial moment, placing the parcel's delivery within minutes of the murder. Poirot stood, walked to the window again, and stared out at the street. The day was overcast now, gray and indifferent. He whispered to himself, someone sent that parcel. Someone who knew she would be alone. Someone who wanted her attention diverted long enough for a silent approach. And as the clouds deepened over Grosvenor Square, Poirot sensed they were not just above London. They were thickening around the murderer, who still sat comfortably within the walls of the Beaumont. That evening, as Poirot reviewed his notes over a modest supper of steamed sole and potatoes in his private suite, a knock interrupted his thoughts. Chief Inspector Japp entered without formality, holding a file folder and wearing the expression of a man who had just been handed the end of a thread. "We've got something," Japp said, tossing the file on the table. "Fingerprints on the brass letter opener. Clean ones. Not smudged." Poirot looked up from his dish, one eyebrow rising with interest. "Indeed. And to whom do they belong?" "Julien d'Harcourt. His prints are on record from a case in Tangier, passport issues. No criminal history, but the match is solid." Poirot reached for the file, opening it with deliberate care. "This is most curious, mon ami. Lord Julian claimed he had not seen his stepmother that morning. And yet his prints are found on the murder weapon?" Japp nodded. "Exactly. That's the break we've been waiting for." "Unless," Poirot murmured, "it is not a break, but a trap." Japp looked puzzled. "How do you mean?" Poirot placed his fork gently on the plate and laced his fingers together. "Consider, my friend, why would a man intelligent enough to use the service staircase, careful enough to time his presence to the minute, leave clear fingerprints on the murder weapon? Maybe he slipped. Maybe he didn't think we'd check." "Ah," Poirot said, But murderers who plan timing down to the minute do not forget the detail of gloves, especially when handling the very thing that causes death. Japp frowned. So, what's your theory? Poirot tapped the file. It is a false lead, a distraction, a classic maneuver. Someone planted those prints, or rather, someone ensured they would be found. But how? Japp asked. Poirot stood and began pacing. Julian may have handled the letter opener days ago, perhaps during a visit to the suite. Perhaps it was a family heirloom or used to open mail. Someone who knew his prints were on it may have chosen it because of that, because they knew it would point to him. Japp rubbed his forehead. If not him, then who? That, Poirot said, is what we must uncover. But I beg you, do not arrest Lord Julian. Not yet. Too late, Japp said grimly. Bream acted fast. Took him in an hour ago. Interrogation underway. Poirot's expression darkened. Then I fear, mon ami, that we may have given the real murderer the very shield they sought, time. The next morning, news of Julian's arrest had already begun to circulate. The hotel's tone shifted yet again. Hushed excitement replaced fear. Staff whispered in the corners. Guests speculated in elevators. And yet, Poirot moved through the corridors with unchanged calm. He visited the hotel archives, requesting a list of guest movements, particularly entries and exits on the morning of the murder. A helpful junior clerk named Allen retrieved the logs. Only one guest left the fourth floor between 7:30 and 8:30, Allen said. That was Dr. Venn. He signed out at 7:55. Poirot paused. Dr. Venn left the floor before the murder was believed to occur. Yes, sir. But he returned later. At what time? 9:10. Poirot made a note. And was his absence verified? By the doorman, Venn left the building for a walk, nothing suspicious. Poirot thanked him and returned to his suite. From the window, he watched the cars pass along the square. The city's pulse beat on, indifferent to the traps and lies unfolding in room 405. Julian d'Harcourt sat in a holding cell, likely denying all involvement. But denial, Poirot mused, was not always innocence, nor was arrest always guilt. He reviewed what else he knew. The package. It remained too convenient. He summoned Madame Celestin again. She arrived precisely 7 minutes later, clipboard in hand, as if expecting a formal complaint. Monsieur Poirot. Madame, a small clarification, if you please. The package that arrived for Lady d'Harcourt, it had no clear return address. She hesitated. It had a label, a publishing house, but the typeface was irregular. The label had been glued on. Do you still have the envelope? Yes. Scotland Yard collected it. Poirot requested it from evidence and examined the label carefully. Then he turned the envelope over. Do you see, madame? He said. There is adhesive residue, as if a different label had been removed. She leaned in. You mean it was disguised? Poirot nodded. Precisely. He sent for Japp immediately. I believe the package was a lure, he said when Japp arrived. Not a gift. It was meant to distract Lady d'Harcourt long enough for the killer to strike, and to ensure she was seated, unguarded, and focused elsewhere. But who sent it? Japp asked. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Someone who knew her habits. Someone who could predict her solitude. That afternoon, Poirot visited the interrogation room where Julian sat with Inspector Bream. He entered unannounced. Julian looked up, pale and angry. Here to finish the job? Poirot held up a hand. No, I'm here to prevent an error. Bream scoffed. The prints match. He lied about the stairs. What more do you want? Poirot approached Julian slowly. Milord, the letter opener. Had you ever handled it before? Julian nodded. Yes. Weeks ago, I used it to open a parcel. My stepmother handed it to me herself. Poirot turned to Bream. Sir, there is your answer. Bream scowled. Convenient. Poirot reached into his coat and withdrew a photo of the package. Then explained this. A package altered to appear like it came from a publisher, with a removed label underneath. That was not coincidence. That was construction, planning, deception. Bream looked at the photo, then back at Poirot. Still doesn't prove who did it? No, Poirot said. But it proves who did not. He turned to Julian. When you returned from Tangier, did you notice anything unusual in the suite? In her manner? Julian's jaw worked. She was calmer. For once, she wasn't criticizing anything. That morning, she said we'd talk after breakfast. I didn't think much of it. Poirot pressed further. Did she mention a letter? No. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Because she did not finish it. Something, or someone, interrupted her before she could. That evening, Poirot invited Lady Serena to his suite. She arrived dressed not in black, but in deep plum, a color that bespoke transition, not mourning. He offered her tea. She declined. Monsieur Poirot, she said, I know what you're doing. Do you? He asked pleasantly. You're trying to unsettle me. You think I know something. Poirot studied her carefully. On the contrary, I believe you know many things, but I am most interested in the letter. I told you. I never read it. But Lady Darcourt addressed it to you, and she did not send it. What stopped her? Serena's composure faltered, only for a heartbeat. I don't know. Poirot leaned forward slightly. You were seen leaving her suite the night before the murder, around 10. You had been arguing. Serena's face went rigid. She was threatening to cut Julian out of the will. Why? She claimed he was siphoning funds. I told her she was imagining things. Were you protecting him? No, I was protecting her. She was growing irrational. Poirot's tone softened. And yet you feared what she might do? I feared she'd isolate herself entirely. Poirot placed the envelope on the table. I believe you resealed this letter. Serena stood. If you have an accusation, make it. Poirot remained seated. No, madame. I do not accuse. I observe, and I believe someone wanted this letter suppressed, not because of what it said, but because of what it might reveal. The final message, the missing truth. As Serena departed, her shoulders visibly tensed. Poirot stared at the envelope once more, then looked out the window. He whispered, The false lead has done its work. The eyes are on Julian, and so the real killer moves freely. By the following morning, the Beaumont Hotel had resumed its elegant rhythm, but Poirot noted how the rhythm had changed tempo. There was an artificial calm in the air, a kind of poised stillness, like the moments before an orchestra begins to play. Staff spoke in softened tones, eyes darted more carefully. Word had spread of Lord Julian's arrest, and with it, the unspoken assumption that the matter was near its end. But Poirot knew the truth. The murderer had merely been given the gift of time, and time, to the guilty, was either a window or a wait. He spent the morning in the lounge, reading Le Figaro and sipping chocolate, but his mind was not on the paper. His eyes flicked from headline to hallway, noting who passed and how they passed. Dr. Venn walked briskly through the lobby, adjusting his cufflinks and barely acknowledging the staff. Lady Serena entered next, her expression unreadable, her lips painted darker than the day before. Poirot's gaze lingered as she vanished into the lift. He waited until noon, then requested an informal conversation with the doctor. Not in a formal office, but outside in the garden terrace. Dr. Venn accepted the invitation with professional courtesy, joining Poirot beneath the wide awning that overlooked the meticulously trimmed hedges. The light breeze stirred the silver edges of Venn's hair. You seem preoccupied, monsieur. Poirot began lightly. Venn folded his arms. I assumed you wanted to discuss Wilhelmina. But of course. She is the reason we sit here. Ven's expression was tired. "I've told the police all I know." "And yet," Poirot said, "it is the things unsaid that interest me." A pause. Poirot continued, "You knew her better than anyone, better even than Julian or Serena." Ven frowned. "That's debatable." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps. But you visited her in moments of vulnerability. You observed her in ways others could not. Tell me, did she mention fears of being followed?" "No." "Of being poisoned?" "No." "Of being betrayed?" Ven hesitated. "She was always wary of Julian, but not of you." Ven looked directly at Poirot. "I was her doctor." "Precisely," Poirot said, voice quiet. "And doctors are rarely questioned, especially by those who trust them." There was a beat of silence. Poirot shifted his approach. "Do you know why I invited you here instead of questioning you behind closed doors?" Ven offered no response. "It is because I wish to observe something most delicate, your balance." A man confronted formally stiffens, but here, on the terrace, the mask is harder to hold. Ven gave a short, humorless laugh. "If you think I had something to do with her death, say it." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "I think, Doctor, that you know who did it, or you strongly suspect, and I believe you fear they may now come for you." Ven blinked, and for the first time something shifted in his eyes. Poirot sat back. "Ah, alors, I touched the nerve." Ven stood abruptly. "You've no right to imply." Poirot's voice sharpened. "No right? A woman lies dead, Doctor. A man sits wrongly accused, and somewhere among her circle, the murderer wears the face of a friend. If you wish to protect someone, I urge you to think carefully. The truth does not wither under sunlight, but lies, they do not survive the day." Ven was breathing harder now. He turned without another word and walked away. Poirot watched him go. The doctor's reaction was not one of guilt. It was fear. Genuine, restrained fear. But fear of what? Of being blamed? Or of someone else altogether? An hour later, Poirot paid a visit to the hotel's small library, where Lady Serena often spent her afternoons. She was seated in the corner, leafing through a gardening book she did not appear to be reading. Poirot bowed slightly. "May I intrude, madame?" "If you must," she replied without looking up. Poirot sat opposite her, folding his hands in his lap. "Tell me, when did you last visit Lady Darcourt's suite?" "Not since the night before her death." "You argued." Her eyes rose. "You seem very interested in that." Poirot nodded. "I'm also interested in what happened after." "I went to bed," she replied curtly. "Alone?" Her silence answered the question. Poirot's tone remained light. "You feared something that night." Serena closed the book. "I feared for her. She was unstable. She was accusing people of things, wild things. Such as? She believed someone was stealing from her. She mentioned changing her will again. She even suggested that someone in the hotel staff had been opening her mail." Poirot's brow arched. "Was this before or after the parcel arrived?" Serena's eyes narrowed. "Parcel? You didn't know? A package arrived that morning, containing a magazine and a cryptic note." Serena's expression remained unchanged, but her posture stiffened. "I didn't know," she said evenly. "I believe you did," Poirot said gently, "because you were the only one who stood to gain from her silence. Not financially, but emotionally. You were losing her trust, losing your place. You assume I was desperate. No, madame, I observe. I saw how you flinched when I showed you the envelope. I saw how you avoided speaking Julian's name directly. You resent him, yes?" Serena did not answer. Poirot rose. "Resentment, madame, is a dangerous root, and murder often grows from it." He left her without another word. Back in his suite, Poirot removed a small notebook from his valise and reviewed what he had gathered. The false lead had pointed toward Julian. But now, two others had revealed themselves in subtle ways. Dr. Venn was hiding something, but it was not guilt, it was fear. Lady Serena had grown defensive, aggressive, increasingly evasive. And still, the question of the parcel remained. He contacted the publisher named on the label, via telephone. A polite young assistant confirmed that no such issue had been mailed to Lady Darkhoor. They had no record of her as a subscriber. The label was a fake. Poirot thanked them and hung up. It confirmed his theory. The package was not a coincidence. It had been made to look mundane so it could pass scrutiny. But it also meant someone had tampered with the mail system, someone with access, or someone who had help from the inside. He summoned the concierge again. Celestine entered swiftly, her brow slightly raised. "Monsieur." Poirot wasted no time. "Have any staff members been dismissed or reassigned in the last 2 weeks?" She nodded. "One, a junior bellboy, Marcus. He was let go 4 days ago for inappropriate conduct." Poirot raised a brow. "What kind of conduct?" "He was found attempting to open a guest's parcel. We have a strict policy." Poirot stood. "May I speak with him?" "He no longer resides here, but I can provide his address." That evening, Poirot and Japp visited a cramped boarding house in Camden where the dismissed bellboy now lived. The room was sparse, the young man jittery. "I didn't do anything," Marcus blurted. "I just thought it was a tip, something left behind." Poirot waved the protest aside. "I'm not here about your dismissal. I wish to ask, were you instructed to deliver a package to Lady Darkhoor on the morning she died?" Marcus blinked. "Yeah. It came with the morning papers." "Who gave it to you?" "I don't know. It was just sitting there in the staff room, addressed to her. It looked official." "Did you see anyone near it?" Marcus thought. I think I saw Lady Serena leave the corridor. She was visiting the concierge office, I think." Poirot's expression sharpened. "Merci," he said softly. Back at the Beaumont, Poirot retired to his suite. He now saw the outline forming, faint but unmistakable. A planted package, a fake label, a note inside designed to hold attention. An envelope never sent, but resealed. A letter opener with conveniently incriminating prints. And a woman, elegant, intelligent, and increasingly cornered, who had been closer to the deceased than anyone dared admit. But there remained one final piece. The motive. Poirot sat alone in the quiet of the room, watching the shadows grow longer across the floor. He whispered, "Now the game begins to turn, and the killer begins to feel it." The storm did not arrive with thunder, but with silence. The morning after Poirot's encounter with the ex-bellboy, the Beaumont Hotel was unnaturally quiet. The staff moved briskly, but not confidently. Whispers traveled like smoke through the breakfast hall, the corridors, the lifts. Something had shifted. Everyone felt it, though none could name it. Poirot, however, knew the sensation well. He had seen it in Cairo, in Monte Carlo, and once aboard a yacht in the Aegean, just before a second body was found. The moment when the murderer begins to panic, when the illusion of safety falters and the web of misdirection tightens around the wrong throat. It is not a noise, but an absence of one. It is the quiet before the scream. At 8:45 a.m., a shriek cut through the upper floors. Poirot had just finished tying his cravat when the constable stationed outside his door banged twice and shouted, "Another incident, sir. Room 413. Poirot arrived moments later, followed closely by Japp and Inspector Bream. The room belonged to Dr. Clarence Venn. Inside, the curtains had been pulled closed, the air stale and heavy with a sharp scent of iodine. The doctor sat hunched at his writing desk, shirt sleeves rolled up, a shallow cut running across his forearm. A bottle of antiseptic lay tipped on its side. Blood had soaked into a towel draped over his lap. Japp stepped forward. What the devil? An accident, Venn interrupted quickly, voice flat. I dropped a razor blade while trimming a patch of callus. It caught my arm. But Poirot was already near the desk, staring not at the wound, but at the object beside it. A box cutter, clean, functional, not a razor blade at all. Bream glanced at Poirot. This isn't normal. Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then, Doctor, may I? Venn nodded reluctantly. Poirot examined the towel, the cut, and the items on the desk. All neat, all arranged, too arranged. Poirot spoke softly. It was not an accident, was it? Venn looked up, and for a second his mask faltered. No, he admitted. Bream frowned. You tried to hurt yourself? Venn shook his head. No, I didn't try to die. But I did want to send a message. Poirot's voice was low and steady. To whom? Venn looked down. To whoever's trying to frighten me. I wanted them to know I'm not afraid anymore. Japp exchanged a glance with Poirot. Someone threatened you? I've received 2 anonymous notes since the murder, Venn said. No signature. Both typed. The first read, keep your mouth shut or you'll join her. The second arrived yesterday. You're next. Why didn't you report this? Japp asked. Venn rubbed his eyes. Because I thought it was a scare tactic. But when I returned from my walk this morning, my door had been tampered with. Nothing was stolen, but I knew someone had entered. That's when I lost control. Poirot stepped away from the desk and turned to Japp. You see, mon ami, the murderer is not calm. They are watching us. Watching him. And when the suspicion shifted from Julian to Venn, the killer struck. Not with violence, but with pressure. Intimidation. They do not want Venn to speak. Japp's tone darkened, which means he knows something. Venn's voice trembled. I only know what Wilhelmina told me. She said she had changed her will again. She said it would be delivered to her solicitor the following morning. She was finalizing it the night she died. Poirot asked, did she mention who would be affected? Venn nodded. Yes, she told me Serena was being removed. Entirely. The room stilled. Poirot's voice was almost gentle. That is a very strong motive. Venn nodded again. She had begun to suspect Serena had manipulated her for years. With flattery, with isolation. She felt used. And when did she tell you this? 2 nights before her death. Poirot turned to Japp. We must find that draft of the will. Bream spoke up. We already searched her suite. No signed documents. Then she never sent it, Poirot said. She was interrupted before she could deliver it. And Serena knew? Japp asked. Venn hesitated. I don't know for certain, but I suspect Serena may have guessed. An emergency search was ordered of Lady Darcourt's personal effects, particularly the small safe hidden behind the dressing room wall, a space Poirot had noted earlier, but chosen not to access until now. Inside, various jewels, personal letters, and, tucked inside a crimson folder marked Private, Legal, a partially typed draft of a will dated the day before her death. It was unsigned. The contents were unmistakable. Julian received a modest sum, with the bulk of the estate redirected toward a charitable trust. Lady Serena Lee was named specifically to be disinherited. No reason given. Poirot tapped the folder. She never signed it, but the intent is clear. The motive is confirmed. That evening, Poirot requested a final meeting with Serena in the lounge. She arrived in navy, face unreadable. She did not sit. You sent for me. Poirot stood. Oui, madame. I wish to offer you the opportunity to speak freely before others do so on your behalf. Serena narrowed her eyes. You intend to accuse me then? I intend to understand you, Poirot replied. because something troubles me. You were not afraid when Julian was arrested. You were not afraid when I questioned Venn. But when I mentioned the letter, your letter, you faltered. And now that he has been threatened, you stand calm again. Serena's mouth was tight. I have nothing to say. Then allow me. Poirot began to pace softly. You knew the will was being changed. You feared you were losing her affection and her fortune. You visited her that evening. You quarreled. Perhaps you saw the draft. Perhaps she told you outright. But in that moment, something turned in you. Serena's voice was cold. I didn't kill her. You did not intend to, Poirot said. Not at first, but the opportunity came. You planted the package. You ensured she was distracted. And you waited, outside. You knew the maid would leave her briefly. That was your window. You entered with gloves, used a weapon that bore Julian's prints, and left without sound. I had no gloves. No? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Then how do you explain the lack of your own fingerprints anywhere in her suite, when you were the last known visitor the night before? Serena froze. Poirot stepped closer. You took the earring. You resealed the letter. You created a scene that pointed to Julian. But when I began to pull away the veil, you tried again. You frightened Venn. You entered his room, and this time, you made a mistake. Serena did not respond. Poirot lowered his voice. You are a woman of elegance, but beneath it, you are calculating. And when Wilhelmina chose to remove you from her future, you ensured she would have no future to give. Serena's composure cracked, but only slightly. I don't have to listen to this. No, Poirot said, but you will. Tomorrow I will gather the others, and I will present everything, every contradiction, every clue. Serena turned and walked away without another word. But Poirot saw the stiffness in her spine. Not outrage, not confidence. Fear, real fear. He turned to Jap, who had been watching from a distance. She will not flee, Poirot said. Not yet. She will wait. Why? Because she still believes she can win. Jap asked. And can she? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Not with me watching. That night, long after the clatter of cutlery and crystal had faded into the hushed murmur of the hotel's nocturnal rhythm, Hercule Poirot sat alone at the small table in his suite. His fingers were steepled, his gaze fixed on a single object placed before him, the lone emerald earring. It had been found, as he suspected, in the corridor waste bin 2 floors below Lady Darcourt's suite. A member of the night cleaning crew had discarded the bin's contents hastily. Poirot had insisted they be retrieved and examined. There it was, the missing earring, broken at the clasp, as if torn hurriedly from its owner. He had said nothing publicly about the discovery. Not yet. He had merely thanked the cleaner and arranged for the earring to be sent quietly to his room without a note, without a record. Because this was not the time for declarations. This was the time for silent moves. Every murder, Poirot believed, contained not one deception, but a chain of them, each link designed to protect the next. But chains have weakness. And this earring, this was the weakness in the murderer's chain. Not for what it was, but where it had been found. Discarded in a bin that did not belong to the floor of the crime. To Poirot, that told a very specific story. Someone had taken it not in the struggle, but after, theatrically, as a trophy, or perhaps in haste, and then panicked. They had tried to rid themselves of it, but in doing so, revealed their movement after the crime, a movement that contradicted their alibi. Poirot noted the earring's clasp, bent back at a sharp angle. Not dropped, yanked. A small, unnecessary violence. Perhaps made in anger, perhaps to suggest a struggle that hadn't occurred. He returned it carefully to its padded envelope, locked it inside his valise, and stood. There was still one more detail to verify. He descended quietly to the hotel's service floor. A half-hour's conversation with the night porter led him to the record books. A dull grey ledger tracking maintenance work, staff entries, and unusual guest requests. Poirot flipped through pages with patient fingers until he found what he sought. 2 days before the murder, Lady Serena had requested assistance from maintenance to fix a jammed drawer in her room. She had been moved temporarily to room 408 during repairs. Room 408, 2 doors from Lady Darcourt's suite. He pressed his finger gently to the date and closed the ledger. That was how she had obtained the key. That was how she had begun to execute the plan. He returned upstairs just past 1 in the morning and slept peacefully, for he knew. Now it was merely a question of when to reveal. The next morning dawned cool and grey, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Poirot dined alone. No company, no interruptions, just toast, eggs, and the silent certainty of a mind sharpening its final blade. At precisely 10 a.m., Poirot walked to the concierge desk. "Madame Celestine," he said gently, "I require use of the drawing room again. Please arrange for all involved parties to be present at 11:15 sharp." She blinked. "All of them, monsieur?" "All? Lord Julian, Dr. Venn, Lady Serena, Miss Chapman, the manager, yourself." "And what should I tell them it is about?" He smiled politely. "The truth." The next hour was spent in quiet preparation. Poirot arranged chairs with precision, set a pitcher of water at the center table, aligned notepads, and ensured the clock on the wall was ticking audibly. All part of the atmosphere, all part of the slow tightening of the web. Japp and Bream arrived early and waited in silence, their expressions hard but curious. At 11:12, the first to arrive was Dr. Venn. He looked haggard but calm. Julian followed, pale but collected. Then came Lady Serena. She wore cream, not black, her expression unreadable. She nodded coolly to no one in particular and sat without prompting. Elsie Chapman entered last, eyes darting, hands clutched. Poirot waited until the clock struck exactly 11:15. Then he stood. "Mesdames and messieurs," he began, voice level, "thank you for coming. We are gathered not for speculation, but for revelation." He let the words settle before continuing. "You may wonder why I requested your presence together. Because, as you know, I abhor disorder, and nothing, mes amis, is more disorderly than the crime of murder." He began to pace slowly, the room silent. Lady Darcourt was killed in her suite. A letter opener, monogrammed, ornamental, and deadly, was used. No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle, a letter unfinished, a tray untouched, a woman silenced before her sentence was complete. He paused. And yet, what seemed simple was not. He turned to Julian. "You were accused. Your prints were found on the weapon, but they were old, left from weeks earlier. You had used it to open mail. The murderer merely selected an object you had previously touched, knowing it would point to you. It was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate misdirection." Julian stiffened, but said nothing. Poirot turned next to Venn. "Doctor, you received threats, anonymous notes, attempts to silence you. Why? Because you knew of the new will. You knew Lady Serena had been disinherited, and someone feared what else you might reveal." Poirot turned slowly toward Lady Serena. "And you, madame, you have been patient, controlled, but too controlled. You knew of the will, perhaps not in full, but enough to suspect. You knew your position was in jeopardy, and you knew Lady Darcourt's patterns." He reached into his coat and withdrew the emerald earring. "This," he said, "was found not in her room, but in a bin far down the hall. On a floor you had no reason to visit, a floor you had once been temporarily moved to, from where, 2 days before the murder, you borrowed a key under the guise of a maintenance complaint." Serena sat perfectly still. Poirot laid the earring gently on the table. "You removed it after the murder. Perhaps it fell. Perhaps you thought it would suggest a struggle. You disposed of it in haste, aye, but your panic betrayed you." Serena's voice came low. "This is conjecture." "Ah, no," Poirot said. "It is logic, and there is more." He retrieved the envelope containing the fake publishing label and laid it beside the earring. The package was a ruse, a planted item. It contained a note designed to capture attention. You ensured it arrived just before breakfast. You knew she would open it alone. That was your moment. Japp stepped forward, arms crossed. Poirot raised a hand. "One more thing," he said. He withdrew a folded paper and opened it. A maintenance log, showing that you, Lady Serena, requested help for a drawer in room 408, adjacent to the victim's suite. You were granted access to the service corridor. You had proximity, you had motive, you had time. Serena's hands remained folded. "And yet," she said slowly, "you have no witness, no proof I entered her room." "No witness," Poirot agreed, "except her." He produced the half-written note. "Tell Julian that—" Poirot read aloud, then stopped. "You assumed it was meant to name him, but I believe it was something else. A warning. Tell Julian that Serena—" The room fell still. Poirot's voice softened. She knew. At the last moment, she knew. Lady Serena stood. "I would like to speak to a solicitor." Poirot nodded. Calm. "Of course, madame. They will hear what I have laid out, but you will forgive me if I ask that you do not leave the premises." Serena said nothing. Her composure, at last, was no longer armor. It was costume, and it had worn thin. As the room erupted in whispers and movement, Poirot turned to Japp. "It is done," he said. But inside, he knew it was not yet complete. For now must come the final gathering, where truths were arranged like chess pieces and deception was dismantled with precision. Late afternoon light filtered through the tall mullioned windows of the Beaumont's main drawing room as Inspector Bream ushered the assembled parties into place. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Julian d'Harcourt sat to one side, expression hollow but watchful. Dr. Venn leaned forward, his forearms still swathed in bandages. Lady Serena Lee stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Madame Celestine hovered discreetly by the door. Elsie Chapman perched at the edge of a chair, and Mr. Harold St. John, the manager, watched with professional concern. Poirot entered last, his posture composed, mustache immaculately waxed, eyes alight with purpose. He moved to the center of the room and allowed a moment of silence before speaking. "Mes amis," he began softly, "you have been patient, you have listened, you have watched as suspicions have shifted and as fear has grown. Now, I intend to speak clearly, for confusion serves no one." He gestured to a map of the fourth-floor corridor displayed on an easel. "Here is the scene. Room 405 belongs to Lady d'Harcourt. Next door is room 408, which Lady Serena occupied briefly during maintenance. Let us recall the timeline." Poirot paused, allowing eyes to follow his gesture. At 7:46 a.m., the anonymous package was delivered. It bore a false publishing label designed to mislead. The package contained a magazine and a note intended to draw the victim's attention. The bellboy, Marcus, brought it up and left. At 8:03, the maid, Miss Chapman, delivered breakfast. Lady d'Harcourt began to write a letter. 15 minutes later, Miss Chapman returned, finding her mistress dead. He held up a brass-handled letter opener. This tool caused the death. Its owner had handled it weeks before, leaving Lord Julian's prints, a clever device to shift blame. He placed it down, but fingerprints do not tell motive, nor do they remove opportunity. Turning, he addressed Julian. "You arrived in London 3 days earlier, summoned by Lady d'Harcourt. You lacked a clear alibi when you left the main elevator out of service. You used the service stairwell, observed by Miss Chapman, but you had no foreseeable reason to possess the letter opener that morning. You are innocent of murder." Julian's relief was subtle but visible. He gave a short nod. Poirot faced Dr. Venn next. "Doctor, You were close to the victim. You knew her moods, her ailments, her anxieties. You received warnings, anonymous threats, and you were frightened. You expected I would suspect you since you had motive, to prevent the will from excluding the person you cared for most. But those threats were not from me. Ven's shoulders eased. He exhaled. Madame Celestine, Poirot continued, you handled all correspondence. You signed for Lady Darcourt's mail. You did not know of the false label, but you placed the package on the side table. You did your duty. Celestine inclined her head slightly. He paused and then turned to Elsie. And you, Miss Chapman, you observed Lord Julian on the stairwell and saw the bellboy pass. You preserved your dignity under pressure. You're not implicated beyond being an unwitting witness. Elsie nodded, breathing visibly easier. Poirot let the silence settle before focusing on Lady Serena. He paced slowly, stopping before her. And now, for the truth you hoped to keep hidden. You requested maintenance to room 408, gaining a key to the service corridor adjacent to Lady Darcourt's suite. 2 nights before the murder, you tested your access, marking the drawer's jammed mechanism. You planned carefully. His voice tightened. On the morning of her death, you planted the package, knowing she would read it alone. You entered room 405 moments before the maid returned. You removed one earring, not in the heat of a struggle, but deliberately, as a trophy or to suggest violence. Then you used the letter opener, one you knew to carry Lord Julian's prints, to misdirect suspicion. Lady Serena's expression remained regal, but her eyes darted. Poirot produced the emerald earring case. This was found 2 floors away, discarded in a waste bin by a panicked cleaner. Its broken clasp speaks of haste. You could not dispose of it silently. He unfolded a maintenance log and displayed it. This record proves you claimed a jammed drawer in room 408 on June 2nd. The staff repaired it, granting you the key. You had uninterrupted access to the service hall when no one was watching. Serena's lips trembled. She glanced at the others. Some recoiled, others stared in shock. Poirot raised a hand for quiet. Your motive was clear. Lady Darcourt intended to disinherit you. She confided this only to Dr. Venn, who respected her privacy. You could not bear losing your position, your influence, your friendship, so you engineered the crime to frame another. He stepped back. That is how the murderer hid in plain sight. Breath caught in the room. Inspector Bream moved forward, producing handcuffs, while Japp placed a reassuring hand on Serena's shoulder. Serena's head bowed, the facade gone. Poirot spoke once more. Justice will take its course, and perhaps, through this tragedy, we remember that the greatest deception is not in shadows, but in the face of friendship betrayed. As Serena was led away, Lord Julian leaned toward Dr. Venn. Thank you. Venn nodded, eyes moist. Poirot watched them, then turned to Japp. Let us conclude this chapter, mon ami, and tend to the final details, formal statements, confirmations, and the restoration of order. He offered his arm to Bream. Shall we? And with that, the room emptied, leaving only fading daylight and the echo of truth laid bare. The corridors of the Beaumont Hotel carried a different air the next morning, as if the walls themselves had exhaled a long-held breath. News of Lady Serena Lee's arrest had spread swiftly. The polished concierge, the once trusted companion, was now a criminal in custody. Inspector Bream moved among staff and guests with quiet efficiency, collecting statements and confirming details, while Chief Inspector Japp coordinated with Scotland Yard to secure Serena's extradition to more formal proceedings. In the lounge, Poirot sat with Julian Darcourt and Dr. Clarence Venn, their faces marked by relief and lingering sorrow. He poured them tea in delicate china cups, their clink a gentle punctuation in the otherwise hushed room. Julian studied the steam curling above his cup, his voice low. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without you, I would still be behind bars. Poirot smiled politely, pausing before answering. It is the nature of justice to correct itself when the false leads are removed. Your innocence was never in doubt, but the solution required the unraveling of deliberate misdirection. Dr. Venn reached out to touch Julian's hand. And for me, the threats have ceased. I can rest, knowing she cannot harm me further. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, but let us consider the outcome for Lady d'Harcourt. Though she could not sign the final draft of her will, its intent is clear. The solicitor has confirmed the draft's validity, and with her passing, the charitable trust she envisioned will be established, benefiting those she cared for. Julian, you will receive the modest sum she allocated to you, while the remainder serves her charitable purpose. Julian closed his eyes briefly, bowing his head. She was always generous, even in her final acts. The trio remained silent as a waiter delivered fresh scones. Poirot stirred his tea thoughtfully. Justice is not only the punishment of the guilty, but the fulfillment of the victim's last wishes. Lady d'Harcourt's moral purpose lives on. In the manager's office, Mr. Harold St. John reviewed the morning's reports. He looked up as Poirot entered. Monsieur Poirot, the press is gathered outside, seeking any comment. The hotel's reputation is at stake. Poirot rested a hand on the polished desk. You have handled events admirably. The truth has prevailed, and the hotel stands cleared of wrongdoing, except one betrayed friendship. St. John nodded. We will issue a statement emphasizing Lady d'Harcourt's charitable legacy and trust your words on preserving decorum. Meanwhile, in the hotel's makeshift infirmary, Miss Elsie Chapman watched as staff prepared to resume normal duties. Poirot found her and knelt beside her. Mademoiselle, you did well under pressure. She managed a small smile. I was frightened, but I wanted the truth. Poirot's eyes were kind. Your honesty helped reveal the path. Without your testimony about the bellboy and the staircase, our timeline would have gaps. She straightened. Thank you for believing me. As midday approached, Poirot walked through the lobby. Guests offered respectful nods. Staff paused to thank him. He moved with the quiet dignity of a man who knew his work was done. In Scotland Yard's courtyard, Serena Lee, escorted by officers, paused at the gate. Her once impeccable attire was slightly disheveled. Her composure, though still proud, had begun to falter. She met Poirot's gaze for a moment, a flicker of regret passing across her features. He inclined his head, offering neither consolation nor reproach, only the solemn acknowledgement of a tragic choice and its consequences. That afternoon, in his suite, Poirot penned his report to Chief Inspector Japp. His handwriting, precise as his mind, laid out every step. The false label, the planted prints, the hidden draft of the will, the broken earring, the maintenance request, the psychological maneuvers, and finally, the confession extracted through reason, not force. He concluded with a reflection. In the quiet of the mind lies the power to unmask deception. Justice, served by truth, is the greatest order of all. He signed simply, H. Poirot. As he sealed the envelope, a soft knock came at his door. Madame Celestine stood, a small tray in hand. Monsieur, a message from Lord Julian and Dr. Venn. They wish to invite you to lunch tomorrow to express their gratitude. No more mysteries, just friendship renewed. Poirot offered a gentle smile. I would be honored. She curtsied and left quietly. Alone, Poirot gazed around the room. The small brass key to the service corridor lay atop a stack of papers, a final reminder of how easily trust can be misused. He retrieved it and placed it deliberately on the desk, alongside his report. Then, he donned his hat and coat and departed down the corridor, leaving the sunlit suite to its restored calm. As he passed through the lobby for the last time that day, his keen eyes scanned the faces around him, some curious, some relieved, all unaware of just how close the murderer had come to vanishing into obscurity. But Poirot, who delighted in ordering disorder, knew that, even in plain sight, the smallest detail, a broken clasp, a mislabeled package, a fleeting hesitation, could uphold the scales of justice. And with that, he stepped out into the bustling streets of London, his work complete until the next puzzle called to his little grey cells. Morning light filtered gently through the tall windows of the Beaumont Hotel lounge as Hercule Poirot settled into his customary seat by the fire. A hush reigned in the space where, only days before, whispers of suspicion and hidden malice had simmered beneath the polished veneer of high society. Now, everything was calm, restored to proper order. The trial of Lady Serena Lee was already underway at the Old Bailey, and the hotel staff had begun the delicate work of replacing anxiety with routine. Guests murmured polite greetings as they passed, and even the upright concierge on duty managed a small, respectful smile in Poirot's direction. But this was no ordinary morning. It marked the completion of a case in which the murderer had indeed hidden in plain sight, cloaked by elegance and familiarity. And Poirot, ever mindful of the invisible threads that connect cause to effect, felt it was time to take his leave. He paused to pour himself a cup of rich Ceylon tea, inhaling its fragrant steam. The simple act was a ritual, a final moment of contemplation before the journey to the next mystery. Across the lounge, Lord Julian d'Harcourt and Dr. Clarence Venn sat in quiet conversation, sharing memories of Lady d'Harcourt and discussing the forthcoming establishment of her charitable trust. Their voices were soft, respectful, speaking of legacy and loss. Poirot allowed himself a brief smile, glad that justice had not only cleared the innocent, but also enabled a fitting tribute to the departed. As he rose to depart, Madame Celestine appeared at his side, carrying a small ledger. "Monsieur Poirot, your bill has been settled by Mr. St. John. He insisted on covering all expenses with his compliments," she said in her precise, soft accent. Poirot offered a gracious nod. "Merci, madame. Please extend my thanks to Mr. St. John for his generosity." He folded the ledger and placed it in his coat pocket. "And tell the staff I extend my deepest gratitude for their patience during these trying times." He paused, studying her composed expression. "This hotel is more than walls and windows, madame. It is the sum of all who serve within it. They deserve our respect." Celestine inclined her head, her glaze of professionalism softening for the slightest moment. "They will be most grateful, monsieur." Then, with a courteous bow, she stepped away to attend to other duties. Poirot smoothed the front of his coat, adjusted his cravat, and lifted his hat from the table. Across the room, he caught Julian's eye. The young man rose and offered a small wave, gratitude and relief evident in his posture. Dr. Venn followed, eyes bright with renewed purpose. Poirot raised a gloved finger in acknowledgement before turning toward the entrance. At the door, Inspector Bream awaited, a rare smile playing on his lips. "Travel safe, Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand. Poirot clasped it warmly. "And you, Inspector, continue to trust your instincts when logic alone seems insufficient. Sometimes les petites choses, small details, make the grandest difference." Bream chuckled. "I've learned that now, thanks to you. Farewell, Poirot." Poirot stepped through the doorway into the parting light of early afternoon. The lobby's marble floor gleamed beneath his polished shoes as he moved deliberately toward the curb. A hansom cab awaited, its driver tipping his cap as Poirot approached. "Beaumont to Victoria Station, please," Poirot instructed, handing over the address card he always carried. "Right away, sir," the driver replied, settling into the box seat and cracking the reins. As the cab rolled onto the street, Poirot leaned back, gazing at the bustle of London life resumed. Carriages clattered past motor cars, businessmen strode with purpose, while women in fashionable hats paused to window shop. The city's pulse was familiar, comforting in its endless motion. He reflected on the case, the precision of Serena's plan, the courage of the maid whose testimony had set the first domino in motion, the solemn integrity of Dr. Venn, and the innocent man nearly condemned by a perfectly executed deception. In every gesture and glance, he had found clues, and in every hesitation, a confession waiting to be coaxed forth. It had been, Poirot thought, a masterpiece of psychological manipulation by a woman who believed herself above suspicion. Yet, as ever, the human heart revealed its secrets through small betrayals. A broken clasp, a maintenance request in the wrong room, an envelope resealed with haste. The cab swung onto Piccadilly, and Poirot watched the crowds through the ER. Open window. He smiled gently as he considered how often criminals rely on their belief that others will not look beyond the obvious. They think that if they act within the boundaries of trust, donning the masks of friendship, service, or loyalty, they remain invisible. But for Poirot, whose little gray cells thrived on the invisible, those masks were the first thing to attract attention. At the station, he disembarked and handed his luggage to the porter. Inside the grand hall, the roar of activity enveloped him, announcements crackling over the speakers, porters calling out destinations, travelers hurrying to platforms. Poirot paused at a bench and set down his case, permitting himself one last reverent look at the notice boards listing departures and arrivals. Each train, he mused, carried lives full of secrets, joys, and sorrows. Each journey was a new riddle. The porter returned with Poirot's valise and offered a friendly bow. "Which platform, sir?" "The 2:15 to Canterbury West," Poirot replied, consulting his pocket watch. "And please, mind the boxes. My case is delicate." The porter nodded, taking the case with care. Poirot walked toward the platform, his posture erect, his mind already turning to whatever mystery awaited. As he stepped onto the train just before the conductor's whistle, he glanced back once more. The station was a microcosm of human drama. People reunited, farewells waved, luggage stowed. And somewhere among them, perhaps, was the seed of the next crime or the next confession. Settling into his compartment, Poirot placed his hat on the rack and smoothed his coat. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the Beaumont Hotel behind him. Its polished corridors, its drawing rooms, the faint echo of footsteps that had once concealed malice. He inhaled deeply, savoring the moment when order follows chaos. Then, with a faint smile curving beneath his mustache, he opened his eyes and spoke softly to the empty compartment. Mon Dieu, how satisfying it is when the truth triumphs. And yet in every case, I realize anew that what appears simplest is often the most elaborate. My little gray cells shall rest now, only until the next call to unravel what men and women hide behind the masks of normalcy. The train lurched forward, and Poirot settled back, hands folded. As the landscape outside began to blur, he allowed himself a final thought, that justice, like a perfectly conducted train, must run on time. And that with each mystery solved, he maintained the delicate balance between appearance and reality that so many take for granted. And so, as London receded into the distance, Hercule Poirot's journey continued, ever toward the next perplexity, the next hidden motive, the next triumph of deduction in a world where the greatest dangers are often the ones we never suspect. The courtroom was tense with anticipation when Hercule Poirot took his place in the public gallery. Rows of seats filled, quickly. Friends of the victim, curious members of society, and representatives of the press, all eager to witness the moment when Lady Serena Lee would stand before the bar of justice. The judge's gavel had barely fallen before the district attorney rose, prepared to present the case that Poirot had so meticulously assembled. As opening statements began, Poirot observed Lady Serena at the defense table. She appeared composed, her posture straight, her expression calm. But behind the mask of dignity lay a flicker of doubt, visible only to eyes accustomed to reading the smallest sign. Poirot noted how her fingers flexed around the edge of the table, how her breathing remained steady but guarded. She was readying herself for the unveiling of her own deception. The prosecutor began with a concise summary. The victim, Lady Wilhelmina d'Harcourt, had been found dead in her suite, killed by a letter opener bearing the prints of her stepson, Lord Julian d'Harcourt. Julian had been arrested but subsequently cleared when Hercule Poirot demonstrated the prints were old and intentionally incriminating. Attention then turned to Serena Lee, the longtime companion who had motive, means, and opportunity to commit the crime. Evidence was presented systematically. First, the anonymous package, a false publishing label concealing a note designed to divert the victim's attention. Witness testimony from Marcus, the former bellboy, established that Serena had been seen near the service corridor shortly before breakfast. Next, the broken emerald earring, discovered in a waste bin 2 floors below the crime scene, was introduced. The prosecution argued that Serena had removed it deliberately and discarded it in haste, confident that no one would trace its path. A hush fell when the maintenance log was read aloud. On June 2nd, Serena had requested repairs in room 408, obtaining a key to the service passageways adjacent to Lady d'Harcourt's suite. The log entry bore her signature and was time-stamped. The detail left no room for doubt that she had planned access. Finally, Poirot was called to the stand. He rose, adjusted his jacket, and spoke with clarity. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to consider not only each piece of evidence, but the sequence in which they align. A murderer who hides in plain sight must rely on trust. Lady Serena Lee was trusted by Lady d'Harcourt, permitted to enter her private chambers under the guise of friendship and assistance. She used that trust to orchestrate a crime that pointed the finger at another. He paused, letting the room absorb his words, then continued. The broken clasp of the earring, the carefully planted letter opener, the tampered envelope, each element reveals calculation. Yet the clearest testimony is found in the victim's own hand. A half-written note, tell Julian that Serena... It was interrupted, not by chance, but by premeditated violence. The sentence was to convey the truth. The murderer silenced her before she could finish. The jury leaned forward as Poirot described the reconstruction of events, how the package was delivered at 7:46 a.m., how Serena used the service key, how she waited in the corridor until Lady d'Harcourt focused on the magazine's greeting, how Serena entered, retrieved the earring, applied the letter opener, and how she retreated with the crime scene staged to mislead investigators. Poirot concluded, when suspicion first fell on Lord Julian, the true culprit hoped time would conceal the fault lines. But time, in truth, only revealed them. After Poirot's testimony, the defense called Lady Serena to the stand. The once proud companion took a deep breath, placed her hand on the Bible, and affirmed her sworn oath. Under questioning, she admitted requesting the room 408 repair, acknowledging the key in her possession. She confirmed handling the earring and the letter opener, but claimed it was for mundane reasons. She said she removed the earring to examine its craftsmanship, and that she used the opener to unwrap her own correspondence. The attorney asked, why did you reseal the envelope addressed to you? Her voice trembled slightly as she replied, I thought it was private. My friend often wrote cryptic messages. I did not wish to invade her privacy. When pressed on the motive, her disinheritance, Serena's composure slipped. I loved her, she whispered. I could not bear to lose her trust. I begged her not to change her will. Tears gathered in her eyes. I never meant to harm her. The courtroom was silent. Serena's confession was not yet complete, but the rupture in her defense was clear. The judge called a brief recess. Poirot quietly left his seat and descended the stair, finding Lady Serena alone near the witness stand. She looked up, her face pale. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. He offered a simple nod. I did not intend her death, she began, voice shaking. I only wanted to scare her, to make her reconsider the new will. When she began to write the note, I panicked. I thought if I could make it look like someone else, I would be free to apologize later. Poirot's expression was unreadable. He adjusted his cuffs and said, Madame, the heart of a friend can commit the cruelest betrayal when love turns to fear. Your plan was flawless until the smallest detail slipped. An earring clasp snapped, a maintenance record time-stamped, handwriting patterns judged by her own hand. She wept quietly. I am sorry. He managed a gentle, the truth once unearthed must not be undone. Now you must face what follows. Back in the gallery, the judge reconvened court. The jury returned swiftly with a unanimous verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. A murmur swept through the spectators as the foreman announced the decision. Lady Serena Lee's head bowed. Her fate was sealed. Moments later, as she was led away, Serena glanced at Poirot. He offered a respectful bow. No words were exchanged. In that silent gesture lay finality. Outside the courthouse, Poirot joined Inspector Japp and Detective Bream. Julian d'Harcourt and Dr. Venn watched from a respectful distance. Poirot spoke softly. Justice has been served. The scales balanced by detail, not by chance. Japp placed a hand on his shoulder. Your work was unparalleled. Thank you. Bream nodded. The Yard owes you thanks. Julian approached. Monsieur Poirot, you have given me my life back. I can only offer my eternal gratitude. Poirot smiled. Live well, mon ami, and remember, cherish the trust you place in others, for it is as fragile as a clasp. Dr. Venn added, and may your little gray cells rest until needed again. Poirot tipped his head, then turned to leave. He paused at the courthouse steps, gazing once more at the grand facade. Inside, Lady Serena would begin her sentence. Justice would take its course, and Lady d'Harcourt's final wishes would be honored. As Poirot walked away, he reflected that the greatest puzzles involve not locks and keys, but the hidden chambers of the human heart. He understood now that every friend, every confidant, every companion holds within them the power to betray. It is in discerning motive, in tracking small irregularities, that truth reveals itself. He disappeared into the bustling London streets, ready for the next call to his little grey cells, ever alert to the secrets that hide in plain sight, awaiting the mind that will uncover them. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the Beaumont Hotel's grand foyer as Hercule Poirot gathered his belongings. The elegant space, so recently charged with suspicion and grief, now hummed softly with the return of normalcy. Porters wheeled luggage, guests exchanged polite farewells, and the grand clock over the reception desk ticked with reassuring regularity. Yet for Poirot, every tick carried the echo of hidden motives finally laid bare. He paused by the concierge desk where Madame Celestine was arranging her ledger with her customary precision. She looked up, offering a respectful nod. Poirot returned the gesture. Madame, he said quietly, thank you again for your discretion. You see, hotels are sanctuaries, and those who work within them are guardians of trust. Celestine allowed herself a small, knowing smile. It has been an honor, Monsieur Poirot. He stepped forward, intending his farewell to each corner of the building, an expression of gratitude for the people who, unwittingly or not, had formed the prison and the stage for Serena Lee's downfall. As he walked the length of the foyer, he recognized the night porter who had retrieved the discarded earring, the bellboy who had delivered the fateful parcel, and the maid whose courage to speak the truth had set every domino in motion. To each, he offered a brief word of thanks. In the lounge beyond, Lord Julian d'Harcourt and Dr. Clarence Venn sat in quiet conversation, their faces lit by the glow of friendship renewed. Julian rose at Poirot's approach. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice full of warmth, "I wish to thank you properly for saving my reputation and for restoring justice to my stepmother's memory." Poirot inclined his head. "You honor me, mon ami. But remember, it was your honesty and the clarity of the victim's own hand that guided me. I merely followed the path you each helped to clear." Dr. Venn stood as well. "And on behalf of those who care for Lady Darcourt's legacy, I thank you. Her charitable trust will bear her name, and her final intentions will be fulfilled because of your diligence." Poirot allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Then her story continues, through the lives she wished to help. That too is justice. He moved on, passing the small staircase that led to the private service corridors. A faint smile curved beneath his mustache at the memory of how Lady Serena had used that very route to commit her crime, thinking it invisible. The lesson, Poirot mused, was that when one believes oneself cleverer than the world, one forgets that every secret leaves a trace. At the reception desk, Inspector Bream and Chief Inspector Japp awaited him. Bream offered a firm handshake. "Your report will stand as a model for future investigations. Elegance and precision in equal measure." Japp nodded. "And I'll never doubt the instincts of my little gray cells again. Thank you, Poirot." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "You are most kind, but do not credit me alone. Credit observation, credit patience, credit the courage to question assumptions. That is how deceit is undone." With his farewells complete, Poirot stepped out onto the curb where a hansom cab awaited. The driver doffed his cap. "To the station, please," Poirot instructed, "and kindly take care with the luggage." The cab pulled away, leaving the Beaumont behind. Its secrets now public, its corridors once again peaceful. As the cab wove through London streets, Poirot watched the city unfold. Children skipping along pavements, shopkeepers arranging wares in their windows, hawkers calling out their wares. Life, he reflected, moved on regardless of the tragedies within its margins. At Victoria Station, Poirot paid the driver and made his way to the ticket office. He secured a berth on the 5:15 to Canterbury West, one of his favorite routes for travel. There, in the relative anonymity of a provincial train, he could reflect in quiet solitude. Once aboard, he settled into his compartment. He placed his valise on the rack, smoothed his coat, and removed the small box containing the broken emerald earring. He held it thoughtfully in his gloved hand, observing the jagged clasp and the tiny chip at the edge of the stone. So small a flaw, yet so telling. So gifted a clue, yet so easily lost without careful eyes. He placed the earring back in its box and closed it gently. Then, with meticulous care, he tucked it into his pocket lining. A keepsake, not of vanity, but of the reminder that the smallest detail could unmask the grandest deception. The train lurched forward. As the wheels clicked along the rails, Poirot leaned back, hands folded. He reflected on the lives entangled in this case, the proud Lady Serena, whose ambition and fear had borne the weight of her guilt. The innocent Julian, almost condemned by a perfect crime. The devoted Dr. Venn, who had struggled between loyalty and truth. The brave maid, whose simple observation had been the spark. And Lady Darcourt herself, caught between trust and betrayal. He pondered how easily the heart's deceptions could be mistaken for loyalty, how a mask of friendship could conceal the sharpest blade, and yet, in the end, compassion and reason had prevailed. For justice, he believed, must balance not only the scales of punishment, but the scales of intention and consequence. As the landscape blurred past the window, rolling fields dotted with cows, hedgerows framing thatched cottages, Poirot allowed himself a moment of rest. The case had closed, justice had been served, the innocent freed, the guilty brought to account. But he knew that tomorrow he would be called again. to sift through webs of lies, to detect the quiet tremor of guilt, to place small pieces against the broader puzzle. For now, though, he closed his eyes and let the gentle motion of the train soothe his mind. He trusted that his little gray cells would remain alert, even in repose, for the mind never truly sleeps. Within the soft evening light of the compartment, Poirot sat in peaceful contemplation, secure in the knowledge that, in a world where murderers hide in plain sight, there will always be those who see beneath the mask. And for as long as truth requires defenders, he would be there to answer the call. Thus ends this mystery, and thus begins the wait for the next.